Huguette Clark led a peculiar life. The daughter of a wealthy former politician and entrepreneur, she first carved out a name for herself within the world of the arts in Paris and New York, but her later life was troubled, and she became increasingly reclusive. Moreover, the circumstances of her death became highly contentious, for Clark had a fortune to bequeath. Huguette Marcel Clark was born on the 9th of June 1906 in the city of Paris in France. Huguette was the second eldest daughter of William A. Clark, while her mother was Anna Eugenia Clark, William's second wife. Her father, who was nearing his 70th year at the time of Huguette's birth, was a leading figure of American life in the early 20th century. He had earned a fortune during the westward expansion of the United States into Montana and other regions from the 1860s onwards, and had then used the money earned to diversify into railway construction during the railroad boom. From there he had moved into politics, becoming a senator for Montana in the 1890s. Accordingly, Huguette was born into one of the richest and most powerful families in late Gilded Age America. Huguette spent her early life living in Paris, as the Clarks associated with some of Europe's high society. For instance, in 1911, she was present with her family at the coronation of King George V of Britain. She was, though, soon sent back to America to be educated at the Spence School, an all-girls private school in Manhattan, New York, in the early 1910s. Here, she resided along with several other members of her family at the Fifth Avenue house, an enormous 6-story, 121-room building, which was believed to be the largest single-ownership house in New York City at the time. When she was born in 1906, Huguette had many siblings and half-siblings. Her father had 7 children from his first marriage, and though 2 of these had died in infancy, 5 lived beyond childhood, although another, Paul Clark, died in his late teens in 1896. Thus, Huguette had 4 half-siblings, Mary, Charles, Catherine and William, each of whom were approximately 30 to 40 years older than her. In addition, Huguette had 1 full-blood sibling, a sister Andrée, who was born 4 years before her, but who died young as well from meningitis in 1919. The familial arrangement was significant, for the patriarch of the family was aging, and his fortune would soon be inherited by his children. This fortune was very considerable, for Clark had continued to develop his business interests, expanding in the 1900s and 1910s into additional mining operations and in the development of Las Vegas in its early days as a stop-off point for travelers on the way out to Los Angeles. Thus, when he eventually did die on the 2nd of March 1925 in New York City, his wealth was estimated to be approximately $300 million. Adjusted for inflation, this would be the equivalent of over $5 billion today. Thus, Clark's children stood to inherit vast riches when he passed away. Huguette certainly did not follow her father into either business or politics once she had acquired her share of his estate following his death in the spring of 1925. This is believed to have been in the region of $50 million, as her father split his fortune roughly equally between his wife and 5 living children. Huguette was content to engage in philanthropy and develop her interests in the world of the arts and fashion. For instance, in the late 1920s, she spent some $50,000 on having a saltwater pond drained at her villa Belos Guardo in Santa Barbara in California for use as a bird refuge, one which she named the Andre Clark Bird Refuge in honor of her sister, who had died a decade earlier. Clark had ended up living briefly out in Santa Barbara after marrying one William MacDonald Glover, a law student whom she had met in New York while they were both studying. They were wed in August 1928, but the union did not last long, and they divorced a week short of their first wedding anniversary. Thus, she soon headed back to New York and installed herself in an apartment on Fifth Avenue. Here, her aesthetic senses were soon being put on display. Huguette converted the apartment and adjoining ones to create a huge open space, which looked out over Central Park in a vast chamber replete with a library and other amenities. Throughout the 1930s, Huguette engaged somewhat with East Coast society, displaying some of her paintings in a show at the Corcoran Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., and attending fashion shows in New York. However, her circle of close friends was small, and to those others who knew her during these years, she appeared elusive and taciturn. As the years passed, Huguette became more and more reclusive. She continued to spend money, but often on initiatives which she never visited or to which she donated anonymously. For instance, a mansion was built by the bird refuge out in Santa Barbara during the 1930s, and Huguette continued to pay tens of thousands of dollars every month to maintain everything there, but she very rarely visited. This reclusiveness intensified following the death of Huguette's mother in 1963, with whom she had lived in New York for most of her adult life. Thus, for much of the 1960s and 1970s, she gradually became an ever more distant figure within New York. Much of this was owing to an increasing distrust of strangers. Huguette had never remarried and had no children, so she began to view everyone in her later years as someone who was potentially trying to inveigle their way into her good graces to benefit from her will. She may not have been entirely incorrect in such a concern, but her methods were paranoid in the extreme. For instance, she increasingly preferred to speak in French to hide what she was saying from those around her. By the late 1980s, Huguette had become an almost mythical figure in New York, almost never seen or heard from, and then in such a limited way that many people believed that she was actually dead, a not inconceivable situation given that she was 80 years old in 1986. Nevertheless, Huguette was alive, though hardly well. By the late 1980s, she had become very frail and was suffering from numerous ailments, the worst being the presence of cancerous lesions on her face which had left her disfigured. Huguette had refused to seek treatment for her conditions, an eventuality which would have forced her to leave her apartment for a prolonged period to visit a hospital, but by 1991 the situation was such that there were no other options. Thus that spring, she was admitted to the Doctors' Hospital of the Upper East Side in Manhattan. There, her physicians gave a sobering account of her condition. Huguette's face had to be operated on and reconstructed. Such was the damage done to it by her refusal to have the lesions treated. Indeed, she had not been to a doctor in 2 decades, and it looked as though she rarely if ever ate. Also, her mental condition was very poor, often seeming as though she was unaware of her surroundings and those that were conversing with her. Following her surgery and recovery, Clark's doctors advised that she could head home to her apartment, but Huguette had taken to her surroundings. Accordingly, she began paying the Doctors' Hospital nearly $1,000 per day for her to be allowed to stay in her hospital room. After, she was moved to Beth Israel Medical Center, and she took up an 11th room floor there, overlooking Central Park, and began paying private nursing staff to care for her. As a result, Huguette Clark would spend the last 20 years of her life living in hospital, but with effectively her own semi-private wing overlooking the park her apartment had towered over for half a century. And curiously enough, the change of surroundings seems to have done her well. Over the years, her health and mental state improved considerably, as noted by her physicians in intermittent reports, though she remained highly eccentric nonetheless. What was curious about all of this is that Huguette did not bother to check in with any of her large number of staff members from her apartment on Fifth Avenue, the estate out in Santa Barbara in California, or a mansion she had bought back in the 1950s in Connecticut, but never actually lived in. In these various residences, staff members continued to receive their pay and continued about their work in maintaining the properties, but they had no idea where their employer was, or what had happened to her. Meanwhile, Huguette was hard at work spending most of her vast fortune before she died. Lavish sums, were given in gift to individuals. A close lifelong friend of hers received $10 million. This may have been above board, but the fact that one of Huguette's private nurses at Beth Israel Medical Center, Hadassah Perry, received over $30 million in cash bequeaths and gifts seems like some element of exploitation was occurring. Then again, Huguette was a difficult woman not to get gifts from in her later years. On one occasion, she gave the repairman who fixed her television in her hospital room $25,000. Huguette finally died on the 24th of May 2011 at the age of 104. There was an immediate controversy surrounding her wealth and estate. For instance, it was revealed that Huguette had owned several very valuable paintings by numerous famed 19th and early 20th century French Impressionist painters, such as Edgar Degas and Claude Monet. Some of these had disappeared from her mansions in the years that she was residing in hospital. However, the greatest controversy surrounding Huguette's will was the dispersal of the $300 million fortune which she possessed at the time of her death. Originally, a will was presented in court which demonstrated that Huguette had wished to give away approximately 3/4 of her fortune to various charities. Some $30 million was then reserved for her private nurse, Hadassah Perry, on top of the $30 million or so of gifts and money which Huguette had granted her when she was still alive. Other stipulations allowed for a bequest to her goddaughter, Wanda Steicher, and cash payments to some of her longtime servants in her apartment on Fifth Avenue. But it was soon revealed that prior to the finalization of this will, Huguette had actually signed off on another will altogether just weeks earlier. This had been enormously different to the second will, which was finally certified. The first will had allowed for Huguette to bequeath most of her fortune to her extended family. By 2011, most of these were grandnephews and grandnieces, or even more distant relatives, some of whom Huguette had never met, and many of the older members of which she had not seen since the 1950s. Nevertheless, Huguette had at least temporarily toyed with the idea of granting away the vast majority of her estate to them. When it was revealed that there had been a first will which was quickly changed to disinherit her extended family, Huguette's relatives appealed to the courts. Their arguments were obvious. Huguette had been an extremely old woman of a questionable psychological state, and they believed her private nurse and others had coerced her in her final weeks into changing her will to make themselves the benefactors and to disinherit them. It is plausible that this was true, though it is equally plausible that Huguette simply decided to reward those people to whom she had been closest in her last 20 years. Whatever the truth of it, the judge decided that the family's argument was solid. Thus, Huguette's first will was effectively implemented, with the family receiving upwards of 75% of the entire estate. Huguette's private nurse, Hadassah Perry, was forced to return the $30 million that she had received as part of the will settlement, though on the provision that her receipt of a similar sum in gifts and other bequests over the years while Huguette was still alive would not be challenged. Thus, the Clark family ended up being the major benefactors of her will, though we will never know for sure exactly who the mysterious Huguette Clark had actually intended her wealth to descend to. She herself was entombed in the family mausoleum in the Bronx, New York City, while several of the artworks she collected during her lifetime are found in major museums and galleries today. Thank you everyone for watching this video on Huguette Clark. I hope you found it interesting. Let me know what you thought of her life down below in the comments, and if you have any suggestions, also leave them in the comments. I hope you guys are subscribed and the notifications turned on to get all my videos as soon as I upload them. Anyway, that's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks.